mich sehr, dass ich Sie heute hier zu dieser Veranstaltung Unheard, Frauenbewegungen in der arabischen Welt, sehr herzlich begrüßen darf. Mein Name ist Sybille Straubinger, ich bin die neue Direktorin des VIDC und freue mich, dass es so einen großen Andrang, so ein großes Interesse auch an diesem Thema gibt. Weiblich dominiert, aber sozusagen auch mit einigen Männern muss man noch ein bisschen daran arbeiten, vielleicht auch, dass das auch ein Männerthema ist, auch Frauenbewegungen. Herzlich willkommen. Ich möchte mich ganz zu Beginn sehr herzlich bedanken bei einigen Institutionen, aber auch Personen, ohne die dieser Abend heute nicht möglich wäre. Allen voran die Austrian Development Agency, die uns finanziell unterstützt, und die Bücherei in Wien, die uns logistisch und räumlich unterstützen. Vielen Dank dafür und ein toller Kooperationspartner sind. Ein großes Danke vor allem auch an das Team des VIDC, das diese Veranstaltung möglich gemacht hat, allen voran Magda Seewald, die heute diese Veranstaltung initiiert hat, vorbereitet hat und dafür hauptverantwortlich zeitigt, sozusagen. Dankeschön. Ideen leben aber auch vom Input von außen und deswegen arbeitet das VIDC auch mit Konsulentinnen und Konsulenten immer wieder zusammen. Einer davon, der heute auch dankenswerterweise moderiert, ist Helmut Krieger, der Sozialwissenschaftler ist, der am Institut für internationale Entwicklung der Universität Wien forscht und schwerpunktmäßig sich mit dem arabischen Raum auch beschäftigt. Vielen Dank, dass Sie da sind, dass Sie moderieren und überhaupt sozusagen auch für die Beratungstätigkeit im Laufe des Jahres immer wieder. Und definitiv nicht möglich wäre, danke, einen Applaus, und ganz sicher nicht möglich wäre die Veranstaltung ohne unsere Gäste am Podium. Herzlich willkommen in Wien und schön und vielen Dank auch, dass Sie gekommen sind und sich bereit erklärt haben, hier heute auch zu diskutieren, sind Safa Belghith, Lena L.Meari und Omaima O.Abou-Bakr, die nachher auch noch näher vorgestellt werden natürlich. Vielen Dank, welcome to Vienna. Wenn wir hier in Österreich über den arabischen Raum sprechen, dann sprechen wir vor allem oder hören wir vor allem sozusagen Begriffe wie Krieg, Flüchtlinge, politischer Islamismus, Dschihadismus. Was wir meistens nicht mehr hören oder nicht sehen, das sind die anderen Stimmen, die andere Seite, die es aber auch gibt. Die hören wir nur mehr sehr selten. Das ist die der Intellektuellen, der Künstlerinnen, der Akademikerinnen, der Aktivistinnen und vor allem auch jene der Feministinnen. Und die gehören, ich glaube, da sind wir alle einer Meinung, und da sozusagen lehne ich mich an einen Radiosender, die gehören gehört. Und sie gehören auch gehört, weil sie unter anderem ein Bild zeichnen, ein differenzierteres Bild natürlich zeichnen, jenseits von Stereotypen, um auch eine Frauenperspektive in einem männlich dominierten Diskurs einzubringen, um Gemeinsamkeiten und auch das Verbindende hervorzuarbeiten und auch um eventuelle Kooperationsmöglichkeiten auszuloten. Mit Feministinnen und Aktivistinnen unterschiedlichster Generationen wollen wir heute einigen Fragen nachgehen. Diese Fragen sind zum Beispiel, wie das Verhältnis von islamischen zu säkulären Frauenbewegungen sich darstellt. Das ist auch, wie unsere Gäste die Entwicklungen der letzten Jahre beurteilen. Das ist zum Beispiel auch, ob sie eine gemeinsame Basis für frauenpolitische Forderungen im arabischen Raum sehen. Und nicht zuletzt, welche Möglichkeiten der Zusammenarbeit mit Aktivistinnen in Europa sie als sinnvoll erachten. Ich freue mich auf eine sehr spannende Diskussion und darf Helmut Krieger nun bitten, sozusagen die Gäste auch näher vorzustellen, die Diskussionsleitung zu übernehmen, und Ihnen allen wünsche ich einen interessanten, einen bereichernden Abend und wünsche Ihnen sozusagen ja, einen schönen, spannenden Abend gemeinsam. Danke.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Straubinger. Ich setze jetzt auf Englisch fort. Wenn Sie Kopfhörer haben, Englisch gibt es auf Kanal 3 und die deutsche Übersetzung auf Kanal 2. So I'm continuing in English now. So yes, thank you very much, and thanks for sure to Magda Seewald and the whole VIDC team for facilitating this panel discussion, for organizing everything in such a perfect and wonderful way. And I would also like to thank our interpreters, Gabriele Gallo and Thomas Musil, and I know it's a real perfect job you're doing now. So, ladies and gentlemen, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you all really for joining our event on women's movements in the Arab world. It's my distinct pleasure to chair this panel discussion, and for sure we are very, very pleased to welcome Omaima, O.Abou-Bakr, Lena L.Meari, and Safa Belghith. Thank you really very much for coming to Vienna and joining this panel discussion. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to briefly introduce our three speakers of tonight's event. Professor Omaima O.Abou-Bakr is a professor of English and comparative literature at Cairo University, a founding member of the Women and Memory Forum, and a board member of Musawa and its knowledge building team. Her scholarly interests include feminist theology, Muslim women's history, and gender issues in Islamic discourses. Omaima has published a lot of articles, books, so hence I would like to mention just 2 or 3 in order not to extend our very, very limited timeline we already have. An edited reader that contains translations of foundational articles in Christian feminist theology and Islamic feminist research, and a translation into Arabic. The title of the book is, if I translate it, Feminism and Religious Studies, published in 2012. And the more recent one is an edited volume entitled Feminist and Islamic Perspectives, New Horizons of Knowledge and Reform. And I think this is the perspective you will argue from when it comes to the current developments in Egypt as well as in the Arab world in general. Professor Lena L.Meari, just a few words, is an assistant professor of cultural anthropology at the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences and the director of the Institute of Women's Studies at Birzeit University in Palestine. Lena has a special interest in the geopolitics of knowledge production, subject formation in colonial contexts, decolonizing methodologies, critical feminist theory and its linkage to revolutionary movements. Just a few publications. Sumud, a Palestinian philosophy of confrontation in colonial prisons. A second one is a publication on a very interesting research you did on Palestinian female political prisoners, re-signifying sexual colonial power techniques, the experiences of Palestinian women political prisoners. And the third publication as a co-author, Rethinking Gender in Revolutions and Resistance, Lessons from the Arab World, published in 2015. And I think you will start on giving a short overview on the very, very rich history of Palestinian women's movements over the last 20 to 30 years or so. Also, there is a history of more than 100 years of the Palestinian women's movements. Yes, Safa Belghith is an international relations graduate from the Higher Institute of Human Sciences at Al-Manar University in Tunis. And you also have a degree in English linguistics, literature and civilization from the University of Manuba. Furthermore, Safa co-directs the professional and academic program, the Tunis Exchange, bringing together different participants from all over the world to discuss different issues, current developments in the Tunisian political and societal landscape. At the same time, she also works as a freelance journalist on issues related to Tunisian politics, women's rights, and transitional justice issues. Yes, thank you again for coming to Vienna. It is already 20 minutes past 7, so just a few words to the format of our panel discussion. Each panelist will speak for about 15 to maximum 20 minutes, and then a Q&A session will include your comments, your questions, and hopefully a quite interesting, diverse debate we will have at that time. Yes, who shall start? Safa, do you like to start with critical analysis on Tunisia's politics?
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you all for being here tonight, and for my fellow speakers, and thank you VIDC for the kind invitation and the kind introduction as well. So, as you know, I will be discussing the situation when it comes to women's movements in Tunisia with a focus on the post-revolution phase. I will discuss the different trends, secular or Islamic trends, the points of conflict, the common grounds between them, and how women's movements in Tunisia get manipulated for political gains. So, starting with the right after the revolution, the landscape for feminism was dominated by more secular NGOs, and this is for a few reasons. So, going back to right after the independence, just briefly, the president then, Habib Bourguiba, dismantled a famous union that took a very important role in promoting women's empowerment under the colonialist regime, which was the Muslim Union for Tunisian Women, dismantled it and replaced it with the National Union for Tunisian Women. And this was the first attempt to take over the feminist discourse in Tunis. And this will continue till today. So for that reason, the kind of feminism that was established then was a very secular kind of feminism, and it was also narrow even in its secularism, and it followed very strict state policies and state lines. And that's one of the reasons why there weren't, even after the revolution, the Islamic organizations, they were very limited. They didn't have the ground to grow quickly. The second reason was the crackdown before the revolution on not just Islamic feminism, but Islamic displays of faith in general, such as wearing a hijab was illegal in Tunis before the revolution. Praying 5 times a day was a red flag for the state. Things like having a long beard for men. So all of these things meant that it was very problematic for non-secular NGOs to grow. So right after the revolution, we had a few main secular NGOs, like the Tunisian Association for Democratic Women and the Tunisian Association for Women in Research and Development. So the first one is the main NGO that people discuss when they discuss secular NGOs in Tunis, secular feminist NGOs in Tunis. From the NGOs, from the Islamist NGOs that emerged, they were scattered, and they tried to form fronts and unions, but they didn't have the numbers or the organizational skills or the experience to do so. So there were a few, like Nisa Tunisiyat, which literally translates to Tunisian women, as well as Tunisiyat. So these organizations worked on different issues than the secular NGOs. For example, the secular NGO Association Tunisienne des Femmes Démocrates, has a long history of struggle under the Ben Ali regime. They worked, for example, they were responsible for establishing the first ever shelter for battered women in Tunis before the revolution. They also had played a major role in lots of political uprisings and so on. And they continued in the same line after the revolution. They worked on important legislations, and they had the skill to work on these things. They were also made up of a certain class as well, lawyers and doctors and professors, and they were able to work on legislation such as the parity law and the law against violence against women, which I can get to in a bit. And also they focused a lot on the laws of the Code of Personal Status and the individual freedoms laws. For the other NGOs, for the NGOs with an Islamic background or an Islamic reference, they worked on issues, for example, Nisa Tunisia worked on transitional justice issues. They worked on files of former female political prisoners. For a few years, they collected hundreds of testimonies about women giving their testimonies about, rape and taboo issues that they usually don't want to speak about. They prepared these files and submitted them to the respective authorities. So they were facilitating these procedures for the women involved. So every organization had a different approach to women's issues. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, this plurality was very enriching. The points of conflicts. So the points of conflicts come from a mistrust from both sides to each other. For example, the Association Tunisienne des Femmes Démocrates before the revolution. It was persecuted by the regime, but it was to an extent tolerated. It was able to function legally under the system. And this was because its notion of feminism and of who the proper Tunisian woman is coincided or aligned with the state-imposed understanding of feminism, which didn't accept any other type. So they were allowed to work if they overlooked certain abuses that were happening to a large group of women before the revolution, which was the Islamic women. And these points of tension, which I usually get a lot of backlash for bringing this up, because people always tell me, we should move on and we should forget these things. But these sorts of things are responsible for the mistrust and the inability of some people to actually get along, because there is some bad blood that happened, and people need to be able to talk about it openly without pointing the blame. So people need to some people need to apologize, or some people need to explain, and some people need to say what they feel without it becoming an identity war or an identity issue. From the other side, with the regime propaganda for more than 23 years, there was a lot of fear from Islamist organizations or Islamist people, and the fear from these after the revolution, the fear that these people might take over the state and they might take away women's freedoms was a legitimate fear for a lot of people. So in the beginning, it was difficult to work through these issues. And there was a lot of tension in the parliament, for example. There were different protests for defending Islamic identity, defending women's liberties. But afterwards, you could see how these different strands can actually work together, and they can reach an agreement. The most famous example to this is the parity law. So the parity law was a parity law in the electoral lists, which stated that there needs to be, at least the last amendment of it stated that there needs to be horizontal and vertical parity, which meant that the electoral lists for political parties need to have equal number of men and women, and they need to alternate in slots as well. And they need to alternate in heading the lists as well. So there needs to be the same number of women heading the lists and men heading the different lists. So this law And this law was voted on by yes, by all the female parliamentarians. I think 73 females in the parliament. They all voted yes, and they didn't just vote yes, but they also worked together for months to get this done. They lobbied for it together, and they mobilized people to get this through, which means there is some common ground. Another major law that was also a point of agreement was the law against violence against women. The law against violence against women, which was voted on last year, for the first time ever brought up the issue of marital rape, which is considered a taboo in the region in general. And for this law as well, there was a lot of agreement. There was a lot of agreement between the different strands. Everyone agreed about the different points. For example, they dealt with a very controversial issue of rapists marrying their victims in order to get out of punishment and so on. So these examples prove that there is room for agreement and for cooperation between the different strands, even if they don't have the same perspective, the same views on different issues. What might be dangerous, however, for the feminist movement right now in Tunis is if it gets manipulated in the political game, which is a tendency that started after the independence. And it continued with Habib Bourguiba, Ben Ali, and right now as well with President Sybille. So before the revolution, Tunisia, there was a focus from the regime to paint Tunisia as the leading country and the progressive country when it comes to women's rights. And there was a lot of focus on painting the Tunisian women as modern and progressive, and that was done for different reasons, of course. But one of them would be to avoid discussing the extreme human rights abuses that were happening back then, the imprisonments and the torture and so on. So, in a similar manner. Women's issues today also get manipulated in order to avoid discussions about the economy or about corruption or about transitional justice. Maybe the most famous example to this would be something that you have probably all heard about, which is the conversation about the equal inheritance between men and women. So this is, for many reasons, for many reasons that I mentioned, this is a very controversial topic, and it will not be solved like overnight. But one of the most important factors of this issue is that it does come first of all from the state and from a president who is a remnant of the former regime. And who is trying who is attempting to revive the Bourguibism kind of feminism, which is led by a patriarchal state figure who is suddenly and out of nowhere attempting to liberate the Tunisian women. And that's to me, that's the legacy that this president wants to leave. And I think those who are familiar with him, they know that it's improving the women's situation in Tunis is not on his agenda, to be honest. So there's that, and there's the fact that there's also the timing of these laws. So, for example, there was the repeal of a decree that banned Tunisian women from marrying non-Muslim men. So this decree, called Decree 73, so this decree was repealed by the president and by the respective authorities one day after signing, just one day after signing a highly controversial law. So this law was the law for administrative reconciliation, which granted amnesty for former corrupt people affiliated with the former regime. And it was also an initiative by the president, and it was contested and protested against for 3 years. until it passed, and then the next day we're talking about the ability to marry non-Muslim men, and that's what everyone was talking about. And it's suddenly like nothing ever happened. Another issue with, for example, the equal inheritance as well is that, for example, for the Islamist side, for them it comes from people who were responsible for their own abuse in the past. So it comes from a head of state who was a part of the former regime, from the Bourguiba and the Ben Ali regime, and it comes from a presidential committee that was formed by the president, and the head of the committee is a secular feminist who was the president of the Tunisian Association for Democratic Women, which for a large portion of society and of women is considered an association that reinforced the abuse and put a target on the back of Islamist women during the former regime's time. So, I do think that would be a serious and important way to look at this law, not just from the religious dimension of whether halal or haram this law is. Thank you for listening, and
thank you. Perfect in time. Yeah, absolutely in time. Thank you really so much for this very sharp analysis on state feminism when it comes to the issue how political elites are using, co-opting the different feminist tendencies. So I would say let's move on to a very, very difficult situation in Egypt. Omaima, could you please continue?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I planned on maybe the first part to attempt a basic definition of Islamic feminism, perhaps in terms of ideas and goals, and then maybe move to context as well. From the start, what is meant now by Islamic feminism, particularly as it is expressed and articulated in English in the last 20 years, it's a knowledge production project that leads to reform and change. This is very, very general. It's a homegrown or an indigenous kind of feminism that emerges from within an Islamic paradigm. It uses the Islamic paradigm. It uses Islamic principles to construct a critical kind of feminism, a critical feminism towards the Islamic heritage. So what's Islamic about it, or what's feminist about it? Feminist in that it's a critical stance. It's a critical stance towards patriarchy in the interpretive tradition, or practicing patriarchy in the name of religion. So it's critical from that perspective. But it is Islamic because it's pro-faith. It doesn't attack the religion. It doesn't. It's not anti-Islamic or anti-religious. It is a pro-faith position from within the faith itself and from within the tradition itself, to offer alternative reinterpretations of the main sources, even of the Quran, of the tradition of the Prophet, of the juristic tradition. So it's a complex and a very huge intellectual and theological project. That's how it started. Whether regardless of where it is, whether it's in the Arab region or in the broader Muslim world, but that is its main goal and mission. But I should also make a point to differentiate in the English usage between Islamist and Islamic. This is important, particularly in relation to the Tunisian context and what Safa was explaining about the Islamist organizations in Tunis. Usually the term Islamist, when we say Islamist organizations, or we mean it's political Islam, what has been known in the last 30, 40 years even as political Islam, meaning organizations, and specifically the Muslim Brotherhood, organizations that have a particular political ideology as the main goal. And then when we say Islamist women, for instance, then we would mean the Muslim sisters, or we mean the sisters, the members of the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, or the Salafi women, another trend. But particularly the Islamist women, what would be meant by that is the Muslim sisters, or the women working within the huge organization of the Muslim Brotherhood, who were very active and very powerful. But all their activism is directed to the service of the political ideology of that group or party or organization. They're very strong activist women professionals. It's not like they're domestic housewives, but they don't have a self-conscious articulated feminist goal. As a matter of fact, they look very down on using feminist terminology or using the feminist frame of reference or tools of analysis. Anyway, so that's why this trend that emerged in different parts of the Muslim world outside the Muslim Brotherhood, outside political Islam, we'd be very careful to say either Islamic feminism or Muslim feminism, just to create that distinction. Because with the Islamic feminism, we don't start with the political ideology. We do not subscribe to the political ideology of either the Muslim Brotherhood or Salafi or Salafism. We use feminist tools of critique, the critique of patriarchy, applying it to theology. That's basically it. For instance, understanding in terms of, to be just a little bit more specific as conceptually before I move to context, trying to understand the gap between what Muslim or what Islamic feminists believe, between the basic ethical, egalitarian, liberational message of Islam, the core, which is in fact the core of all religions when you think of it. But patriarchy is something else. Yeah, patriarchy is like slavery, like racism, has been there as an institution before even the religions. But when the religions came, there sort of was a good thing to use to continue to strengthen patriarchy. So one of the goals of this project, conceptually and historically, is to make that distinction that maybe we can rescue that core message that we believe is egalitarian and ethical. If we can get it out from the trappings of patriarchal interpretations throughout the centuries, right? We have a century-long patriarchal tradition. But the challenge is not just to conceptualize, not just to create concepts and theories. That's always the easiest part. The challenge is how to translate these values into practices on the ground, how to change cultures and social and cultural norms, and then in the realm of law, of course, how to make that effective or impactful on women's lives in Muslim societies. Islamic feminism argue for gender justice and equality. They argue against male authority, or considering male authority something that's divinely sanctioned, that can be justified in the major sources. They argue for equal partnership between men and women, whether in the public sphere or in marriage. The inclusion of women's voices and presence. That's a very important part of what we are looking for, and that sometimes manifests itself in two areas of research. I'm not going to get too much into academic stuff, but a lot of the issues in Islamic feminism have been expressed in scholarship. There are two areas where this can manifest itself, the idea of looking for women's voices and presence, historically and in present. Historically, there has been a movement in Islamic studies of unearthing the forgotten history of women in the public sphere, of women religious scholars, of women imams, of women faqihat, jurists, of women muftiyat, women, theological, women leaders, and unearthing that history to use it, not just to put it in a museum, because that can be done, by the way, in discourses. You glorify the feminine only to make it look like something you can put on a museum. No, we're revisioning history or going back to history for the present, to use it as something empowering for the present. So that's one area. And another area, of course, which is related, the presence of women in today's religious institutions, Zaytuna and Al-Azhar, or in the fatwa councils, the European Fatwa Council, or other global councils of bodies of Islamic organizations. So that's also a big problem, because it is very much tied to the issue of male authority and male leadership. That's the big thing. That's the big thing, because that's always been used or presented as a part of the religion. Anyway, so these are all some of the ideas that would be contested and discussed and researched and written about in the Islamic feminist scholarship. And the challenge is, the easier part is to say that, and I'm going to get now into a distinction between secular and Islamic feminism. The easier part is to say, I don't need a religious frame of reference at all, whether Islamic or Christian. I'm just going to follow international human rights criteria and deal with that part, which is okay. The challenge for people who declare themselves as Islamic feminists is that we insist that we use religious justifications. To us, it's a matter of, it's an ontological, I don't know how to use a better word. It's a stance, it's a position that also has to do with our care about the religion itself. So we care about women, about women's condition, definitely, and improving women's condition in Muslim societies and Muslim cultures. We care, but we also care about Islam as a religion, and talking to our societies or to our cultures and saying, please stop using Islam or stop practicing patriarchy and authority and discrimination against women in the name of Islam. Do it, but not in the name of the religion, for instance. So it's, these are some of the challenges within the idea itself. And there are all sorts of small issues that involved, of course, in the theology, in the interpretation of particular verses in the Quran or particular legal traditions, and very, very complicated sometimes theological discussions. But the interesting thing is that these discussions used to be only conducted by male scholars and male circles. Now we're pushing ourselves in there, and this is an instance where Muslim women are doing theology, and I found it's very interesting, by the way, parallelism and similarity with the way Christian feminist theology also started, but that's another discussion. I have 5 minutes. In terms of the in terms of, because that's also an important part of the talk, what is exactly the difference? Is there a distinction? In the Egyptian context in particular, the distinction is not that, maybe, I don't know, and Safa, you can correct me, is not that pronounced or clear as in Tunis, as we were discussing this morning. In other words, I prefer to call them non-Islamic, maybe, women's movement or women's organizations. But you will never have a women's NGO, for instance, in Egypt, self-identifying itself as secular, or L.Meari, because there's a lot of baggage that comes with that word. I don't know how it is in Tunis. I mean, is the word L.Meari actually used by the... No, that's not going to be used in that kind of direct way, even by the non-Islamic or mainstream, perhaps, feminist organizations in Egypt, maybe because of the misperception and the understanding of L.Meari or secularism as not just neutrality versus religion, but as anti-religion, even atheistic. Okay. But then again, that's a very complicated also in the popular perception, not the specialists, or the historians or the intellectuals, but the popular perception. So that's not a term or a stance, a pronounced declaration, actually, that the women's organizations in Egypt will take, and it's ideological. I can see that once you say I'm secular or even I'm Islamic, then your mind moves to the ideological realm, not issue-based. Most of the women's organizations or women's NGOs in Egypt are issue-based. It depends on what is the issue that we are that women activists are fighting for or struggling for. And when you come to think about it, there is a common ground, because most of these issues to be struggled for in Egypt would not be disagreeable to the Islamic feminists. Maybe they would have been disagreeable to the Muslim sisters, and we saw that before the 2011 revolution and during the 2012 and up to 2013. Maybe some of these issues specifically would be disagreeable to the Muslim sisters, and I had many discussions with the Muslim sisters of the Muslim Brotherhood. They were friends, but we disagreed, and they believed in male leadership. I mean, that is a given, And any time you want to have a discussion about egalitarianism, equality, why there's authority, why there's leadership, no, they don't have, they wouldn't have it, they wouldn't have it. But the issue, issues like sexual harassment, like violence, like sexual violence, the personal status law, and fixing the laws of marriage and divorce and custody and visitation right. All these things, when you come to the actual issues on the ground that make women's lives difficult or not difficult, they would be worked upon by all, whether you are a secular or a Muslim or a non-Muslim. If you are living in Egypt, you want to have rights, women's rights. So the movement, it's more issue-based, and when there is an issue that most women would agree on, so that's there. Do I end here, or I mean, you know, he's the boss.
To continue, if you'd like to continue for a few minutes, it's okay. Fine too.
Yeah, the authority. I'll take only 2 minutes for my final point, and then maybe during the Q&A other issues. I'll take 2 or 3 minutes just to make a final point about power, power and negotiating with power. And by power, we mean either state power, either the political establishment or the religious establishment. You see, Egypt is the country of Al-Azhar, right? Of Al-Azhar institution. Yeah, so that's an establishment that's not easy to bypass the authority and the legitimacy of that institution. So, but this is difficult, not just negotiating with power or accommodating or dealing with power has always been a problem for feminists in the Arab region ever since the beginning of the century, let's put it that way, or ever since the liberation movements of the 50s and the 60s, the post-colonial states. Before revolutions, after revolutions, it's always been a problem, and that a tension and an ambivalent relationship between the feminists, whether they're Islamic or non-Islamic, secular or Muslim, whatever. There has been a problem with power, with state power, because states have their own agendas. They have their own purposes and goals, as Safa pointed out, vis-a-vis the women's movement. It's always how to use it, how to co-opt it, how to appropriate it for the state's ideology. So they have their own their agenda, and they can be. And feminists have to deal with that. They have to make a decision. Are we going to cooperate with the state? Are we going to ignore some of the things going on? Or do we, it's an ethical issue and it's also a political issue. The decision to take, shall we just, as feminists in general, shall we go for the small gains that we can get from state mechanisms or whatever, or we have to make an ethical decision of not to participate in the game, in the political game, as Safa was saying. So that has always been a problem. The relationship with Al-Azhar is also, with the religious establishment, is also another ambivalent relationship that's given to ups and downs. But I'm just going to end on something positive that happened just with the Azhar. Now, Al-Azhar will never, it's the huge authority and legitimacy of Al-Azhar institution, which is a male organization. It will never be easy to accommodate the direct feminist, perspectives. However, they are subject to the pressure of public debates. And an example is just 2 or 3 weeks ago, because of the sexual harassment issue, not just globally, as you know, it has a global ramifications now, but even in the context of Egypt, there were a couple of incidents that also took place and were very controversial on the social media, and people were talking about, sexual harassment, and it's been going on in the public debate for some time. The conservative position has always been, of course, it depends on what you're wearing, and it depends on where you are and how you're walking, and it's always been, which is the typical patriarchal, is to blame the woman herself for whatever harassment. So this has been the conservative position. 3 weeks ago, Al-Azhar, out of the blue, issues a very official statement on its site, a page-long statement in Arabic and then in English about sexual harassment because of that event that took place, and stating clearly all kinds and all levels of sexual harassment and violence to women is religiously prohibited, and it's haram. And you cannot blame the woman for whatever she's wearing. That's not an issue, and that's not a justification. That's huge. That was, and other than that, it was really very positive statement that there's a shift in the discourse about that particular issue. And then at the end of the statement, it calls upon the state to be tough on criminalizing it and implementing laws and, you know, just let go of blaming women. And then they had a picture in one of the in one of the journals, the Azhar journals. They had, you know, a composite collage pictures of Egyptian women from history and from the present time, and some of them were not veiled, and that's again very new for an official Azhar publication to have pictures of women veiled, but also women with hair. So and some good friends of ours, you know, who's very outspoken, had her picture right there in the poster. So that's something positive. But thank you very much, and maybe I should stop here. Thank you.
Yes. Omaima, thank you very much. Thank you so much for outlining the concept of Islamic feminism, as well as, and for sure all feminists do perfectly well know how difficult the relation to the state is, be it in Egypt under these repressive conditions, or be it in different other regions in the world. So, last but not least, to Palestine and the Palestinian women's movements.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. Actually, I will start with two quotes, and then I'll tell you why I'm bringing these quotes. So, in an article titled, "How Feminism Became Capitalism's Handmaiden and How to Reclaim It," Nancy Fraser argues that the movement for women's liberation that started out as a critique of capitalist exploitation ended up contributing key ideas to its latest neoliberal phase. And in another article, Laleh Khalili argues that new masculinities and femininities are forged in the domain of US counterinsurgency policymaking, while new soldier scholars represent a softened masculinity. Counterinsurgent women increasingly become visible in policy circles, with both using ostensibly feminist justifications for their involvement. So I think that these two quotes by Fraser and Khalili raise important points for contemplation on the transformations on feminism and how it transformed from a progressive struggle for just and free societies into a conformist project co-opted by contemporary neoliberal and imperial exploitative agendas. So my talk today will focus on similar transformations on the Palestinian women's movement, and specifically the shift that happened on the Palestinian women's movement since the 90s, from a movement for liberation and social justice into a movement embracing neoliberal individualistic rights and values. So I'll try to tackle what caused these transformations. So I'll try to tackle what caused these transformations and to think of how we can get out of this predicament, and mainly through stressing the relinking of gender justice with social economic justice frameworks, and to understand the lived materialities of women and not just focusing on the identity politics and on the cultural aspects of women's lives. So I'll briefly just present the emergence of the Palestinian women's movement. So the emergence of the Palestinian women's movements and the political activism and participation of women goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, and specifically in 1921, when the first Palestinian Women's Union was created in Jerusalem and came to exemplify the organic link between national struggle and social struggle. Then in the 1920s, Palestine was under British colonialism, or it was called British Mandate. And so before the Palestinians had faced the Zionist settler colonial project. And this is the linking of the women's movements and women's liberation struggle with the anti-colonial liberation struggle is not just unique for Palestinian women. And here, like Komari Jayawardena showed in a classical book titled Feminism and Nationalism in the Third World, she showed that feminism in the Third World had originated from the specific struggles of women against colonialism. So the struggle of women against colonialism had been since the beginning linked with women's struggle for their own liberation and for gender justice. So the British colonialism and the succeeding Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine had instigated Palestinian women's political participation and activism as a resistance to these colonial projects. Yet, even though the emergence of the Palestinian women's movement originated as an anti-colonial national liberation or from national liberation desires and commitments, it had affected a change in Palestinian women's gender roles and resulted in their collective empowerment. Specifically, in late 60s and throughout the 70s and the 80s, and after the establishment of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, in 1964, women activists had immediately established the Palestinian Women's General Union as a popular organization working on with women on social economic issues and mobilizing them to participate in the liberation struggle. And following the Israeli occupation of the remaining parts of Palestine in 1967, Palestinians as a whole had established an extraordinary network of grassroots organizations and community-level committees, including student, youth organizations, worker unions, and of course the women's committees, which, so the new women movement in Palestine had originated from these women's committees that emerged and proliferated in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. When the first Palestinian Intifada, the uprising, erupted in 1987, it was these grassroots organizations and community groups that carried out and sustained the struggle and provided the needed social and economic support to victims of political and military violence. So in this sense, the first Intifada reflects not only a revolution against the occupiers, but also a social revolution in its own right, in which women rebelled against for their liberation in all levels, including their national liberation and their liberation and their traditional place in a patriarchal society. So women's activism during the Intifada had been organized and mobilized by mainly 4 women's committees, and each women committee had been linked to different political fraction with different ideologies, so there was a multiplicity in the ideologies that affected and were carried by these different women's movement. And then, like, these women's committees had organized demonstrations and confrontations with the military occupying forces. Their slogans had included demands for national liberation and independence, and demands for the liberation of women. So women's committees had also established women's productive cooperatives that contributed immensely to economic self-sufficiency, or what was called sumud economy, during the Intifada. Despite the limitations, some of the limitation of these committees, the women's mass-based organizations had a crucial role also in consciousness raising and delivering services in areas of health, education, agriculture, and other spheres. So what happened, the main rupture, not just on the women's movements and their mass organizations, but it happened also to all Palestinian social movements. This rupture happened in the post-Oslo. So the post-Oslo era, after the signing of the Oslo Accords between the leadership of the Palestinian liberation organizations and Israel in 1993, this constituted a rupture in the whole history of the Palestinian struggle for liberation. The Oslo Accords not only changed the Palestinian liberation project into a state-building project, but under the continuation of the colonial dispossession and colonial rule, it also transformed the political culture of Palestinians, specifically in the West Bank, and it changed also the organizational structures of their movements. So one of the main post-Oslo transformations was reflected in what we call the NGOization of political activism, or what others would call the professionalization of politics. And throughout the post-Oslo years, the Palestinian mass organizations, including the women's mass organizations and committees, were deliberately invaded by foreign funding, Western funding, with conditionalities on what to focus on, what to do, how to work. And so rather than having the opportunity to develop their own social and economical infrastructure, Palestinians were taken hostages by funding conditionalities upon satisfying the funders' demands, which had penetrated the community from the top down, including the Palestinian Authority itself. So with the widespread network of funded NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, operating throughout the Palestinian community, the old grassroots voluntary organizations simply disappeared from the map. And what we have then is NGOs, which donors and NGOs supporting shifts that were already underway, but had been, and these shifts had changed the whole organizational structure of the women's committees. They changed their agendas, and more importantly, instead of mass grassroots movements who's linked to women's issues and women's material lives on the ground, they turned into a like of elitist professional NGOs woman, the marginalized woman in this new structure had become the target group for their work and not the people who they join in order to struggle for their own liberation. The whole agenda had changed, while in the previous era, the social justice, economic justice were the main leading slogans. Now the more liberal discourses, which is more talking about individual rights, the integration of women into the labor market without criticizing the structure of this labor market, calling for working on the integration of women in decision-making positions without thinking about the structures of these decision-making positions. So the whole radical agenda for feminist agenda, and in this case the Palestinian women's agenda, for linking the liberation of women with liberating societies and liberating the exploited and building a more just and free society. What happened is that now the whole liberal feminist discourse about individual rights and about women's entrepreneurs, and so that what become the agenda, and that was the main problem that delinked women, the women's movements from the other women's needs and aspirations. And that's why now we find a more professionalized women organizations, but with no constituency on the ground. And like, as I said, led by the funding, the main issues that now are globalized, that working on raising women's consciousness on their rights according to CEDAW or the other conventions, while ignoring that the Palestinian people and Palestinian women on the ground, they don't have any material basis to practice these rights. The other more also led and directed by this global agenda of UN agencies, including the UN Women's and High, is the focus on the domestic violence, which is a very important issue. But in the context of Palestine, the focus on the domestic violence is happening in a form that what Palestinian women should talk about is the violence of the Palestinian man against the Palestinian woman, and ignoring the violence of the colonial structure that is constituting people's lives and women's lives, and ignoring the violence, the structural violence of the neoliberal economic agendas that is impoverishing people, including women. So the whole agenda, feminist agenda of dealing with women's issues, with tackling violence, had been co-opted in ways to depoliticize women's rights, to de-link women's issues from broader issues. And that's why I think that one of the ways also for the Palestinian women's movement to get out of this predicament, and specifically because depoliticizing women's issues and gender issues and is also related to the culturalist approach to women's issues, in the sense that women, Palestinian women or Arab women or women in the Muslim world, their life condition is perceived in the more Orientalist, colonialist perspective as constituted by their culture, their patriarchal culture, by their patriarchal religion. And these kind of discourses, of Orientalist discourses, are like forming also the neoliberal agendas, because they are just focusing on the cultural issues. And as if women's lives, including Palestinian women's lives, are just constituted by the culture, and as if they don't, their lives are not affected by the materialities of their life. And in the materialities here, we're talking about the exploitative economic systems, by the structural violence of the colonial structure. So one of the problems, I think, or one of the ways to get out of these problems is to rethink about women's issues in its materiality, and away from just the identity politics or just linking women's issues, and specifically in Palestine and in the Arab world, with culture and with religion, because women's lives and lives conditions are constituted by material structures, and women's movements should go and relink women's issues and women's liberation issues and women's rights with broader struggles for justice, for broader struggles for against exploitative structures. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Yes. Lena, thank you really so much for bringing back in the issue of neoliberalism and its linkage to the way how different states, or let's say in regions, neoliberal transformations also co-opted and a radical feminist agenda dating back to the 60s and 70s and 80s. The struggle for social justice is on the agenda now again. I mean, we have a lot of different perspectives heard now over the last 15 or 16 minutes or so. The situation in Tunisia, after a so-called success story presented in an Orientalist way, Tunisia is the only success story after 2011 in the Arab world. The issue of a very repressive situation in Egypt after 2013, and at the same time the religious establishment still quite powerful, and how to deal with it from an Islamic feminist perspective, come into the issue of neoliberalism and the way a radical feminist agenda in Palestine was co-opted due to a so-called peace process, which was a quite direct regulation mechanism called the Oslo Peace Process. So we have a lot of topics, and maybe we can bring the different perspectives together. But first of all, yes, it's time for your questions, for your comments, and yes, it would be great if you could use the microphones we have. Michael has one, and I hope it's not the only one. Fine, the second one. Okay, so we have nearly 40 minutes left, so it's great to collect some statements, some questions you have. Maybe we can start with you here, Michael. Yeah, thank you. Please, it would be absolutely great if you could introduce yourself.
I can.
In just
okay.
One sentence.
So, good evening. My name is Gürtel. I'm a lawyer, and I have a question to you. Madame Abu-Bakr, sorry, I can. Also, I think your way to interpret Islam in a feministic way, that's how I understood you, I find that great. Did you write books about this? Are there books about these feminist interpretations? Because I think the Islam, also it's a good way, because I think if you only take the Western concept and put it on top of any society, of the Tunisian, of the Egypt, this is simply not the same society. So maybe your way is a very successful way, and I would like to hear if they are out there, the feminist interpretations, and where to find them.
Thank you. For sure, there are different kinds of publication, but Omaima, I think you can answer them later on. I think we have another question here.
Thank you. My name is Ralf Leonhardt. Safa, you have been speaking about both secular and Muslim feminist organizations, and about coincidence on issues. Apart from those issues, is there a institutional cooperation between those groups? And Lena, you've been, I understand, basically speaking about PLO organizations. Is there such a thing as Hamas feminism? Is there cooperation? And are you seeking and having cooperations with Israeli Jewish feminist organizations?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think the next question, and then we are moving back.
Does it fun? Yes. My name is Alev Korun. I'm a politician from the Austrian Green Party. Thank you so much for your very, very interesting statements. Each one of you, it was fascinating for me. And I have two questions. The first one is maybe a bit general, but still. In which ways do you think that we as women living in not Arabic societies could support your movements for a more just society for women in your countries and in the region? And the second question is about status law. As far as I'm informed, there have been discussions in different Arabic countries, especially by very conservative or fundamentalist groups who try to set the marriage age, for example, till 9 years, especially for women and girls, which is most of the time, as far as I know, dealt with the status law or is part of the status law. Can you tell us something about these struggles, and is there alliances between different groups in your countries against such developments? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Just would be fine to use the microphone. Yeah, but it's an issue of translation and the colleagues watching.
I'm merely a student, and I just wanted to ask, like in Europe, many like feminist theories or movements are linked also to transgender or transsexuality, and if this is any topic also in Islam or in like more secular movements in your countries. And yeah, thank you a lot for your speeches. It was great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe another one. Yes.
Hello, my name is Özge Çetinkaya, and I'm an economics student. There? Okay. And I was raised in a Muslim family with a Muslim mother who is also a feminist. But she was also internally torn up between what she believes in and what she was taught in this patriarchal structure, and her feminism and her belief that a woman should be treated equal. And for 15 years, I've been asking my mother the same question, and also in my local Muslim community, I've been asking the Hojjas the same question, and no one was ever able to answer this question, even though it's a very simple one. My question is, why is the azan, so the call to prayer, always called out by a man. To my knowledge, in every single country, this call to prayer is always called out by a man. And the only answer I ever got was that women's voices are haram. But that is not a satisfactory answer to me, because I don't understand why my voice should be haram. So I want to ask you, why do you think that is, and if you think that that is okay, and if that, in your opinion, has roots in Islam or not? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, yes. Who wants to start? Safa? Safa?
I will, okay. Thank you all for the questions. So the first question about the institutional cooperation between the different organizations. So my memory might be failing me, so there might be an NGO that, or a union or a front that has women organizations from different trends, but I don't really recall any of that kind. However, there is the governmental institutions. So, for example, the parliament, for example, as well. So in the parliament, there is the Committee for Women. And the Committee for Women has women representatives from all the different parties, with all their different backgrounds, of course, from extremely secular to an Islamic a background with an Islamic reference, and they work together on the issues of like the laws that I mentioned earlier. So there is that sort of institution. I don't know if there is one out of will, if I can say that. So.
Do you want to add something about the personal status law in the Tunisian context and the issue of marriage of?
So I'm a little bit confused about that. Was this in Tunis? People asking?
No, it was in Iraq, for example.
Okay, so because it's not really, it's not a debate in Tunis. Making the marriage. This is what you meant, right? Making the marriage age 9. This has never been a debate in Tunis. Even making it less to what it is now, it's not a debate, to be honest. What else? So the transgender movement, our transgender movements present, homosexuality movements present in Tunisia. So Tunisia was the first Muslim country to legalize an NGO for protecting the rights of homosexuals and transgenders, which is called Shams organization. So legally they are present, but they have a radio station as well. But that doesn't mean that they're really that much empowered or free to do whatever they want. They still suffer from police harassment, from the recently criminalized anal tests as well, to detect if someone, supposedly to detect if someone is homosexual or not. So they are present, but a lot more needs to be done.
But are there any, are they trying to cooperate with feminists or feminist organizations?
So,
Sorry, just want to repeat what you already said. Is there a kind of cooperation between feminist initiatives, organizations, and transgender, transsexuality initiatives, or the one you already mentioned?
So, for the report that was recently proposed by the Presidential Committee, the report that discusses equal inheritance. So the same report discusses several other issues, including decriminalizing homosexuality. So there is an initiative from that side. From the other side, if you ask the members of the organization, a lot of them will tell you that not enough is being done. So they might even say that, like women's issues, for example, these issues can also be manipulated by some people and taken as an excuse by some people to look progressive, while they don't really mean it and they don't really care that much.
And I think we have a quite interesting publication on that topic in general. Joseph Masset's the International Gay Movement, but yeah, Desiring Arabs. Yeah. Yeah. What about your question on how to support movements in the Arab world from European initiatives, feminist or other ones?
Yeah. So the first step for that would be, for example, honestly, events like this that are, initiatives like this that would help people understand the real situation in these countries and avoid trying to apply one understanding of feminism, the universal understanding of feminism, because these countries have their own context, and also these countries have a colonial experience or a colonized experience, which means that a lot of the universal feminist initiatives might seem for a lot of people as an attempt to take over their identity from Western powers, which is, in the case of Tunisia, that was an approach by the French colonialism. And for example, Habib Bourguiba, during the French colonialism, turned down initiatives that asked for women to go out in the streets unveiled. And this is Habib Bourguiba who, tried to unveil women later on. And it's because in that context, it was seen as playing into the colonialist states' attempt of eliminating the culture of these people. So here, these countries might not be colonized, but they still feel that their identity is under attack. So maybe the European institutions or NGOs should start by looking into these nuances and understanding that there are different trends, first of all, and also hearing from the other side.
Thank you. Omaima, do you want to continue?
I could respond to some of the things that have been asked, that were raised. In terms of the writings and the scholarship that you asked about, lots, particularly since the 1990s, but mostly in English. Luckily, that's good for English-speaking person, but actually we have the downside is that rarely there's a material in that in Arabic. That's why I try to. I write in English, but I also try to produce in Arabic. But lots of names since the 1990s have been working, whether outside the Arab region or inside, names that you're probably familiar with, like Amina Wadoud, like Kishi Ali. These are American Muslims. And then there's Ziba Mir Hosseini. She is UK-based from Iranian origin. In Morocco, there's Asma Lamrabit. She writes in French, but her works are being translated to English and to Arabic. And then, of course, the work of Musawa in general. It's a global movement that has an official site and has publications arguing that cause of building an alternative Islamic feminist view. And I've also written few things in both in English and Arabic. So there are lots, and it's getting to be a lot, really. But that's a good thing. The question about how can European women be supportive of Arab feminists or Muslim feminists, there are two ways or two things. You can be supportive of the Muslim communities here already in Europe. That's one thing, by perhaps resisting Islamophobia, by resisting racializing Arabs and Muslims, because it's sometimes it's not just religion, but also race is a factor. So this is also, I think, a moral responsibility on the part of Europeans that, in European history, post-Enlightenment European history has been all about resisting slavery and racism and about the democratization. So you might as well apply those values that, you know, that Europeans have been through wars to Arabs and to Muslims. To resist, I mean, to assist the Muslim communities or Muslim women in Europe by, again, resisting and rejecting the stereotypes of the victimized, oppressed Muslim hijabi woman. Okay, so that's it. In terms of us living in the Arab region, you can also be supportive in the sense of respecting our own issues and our own struggles. You use the expression of getting a Western thing and putting it on top, and also Safa referred to that, because issues are always almost contextual. So there are going to be issues that will be uniquely European or American or African or Asian or whatever. Yeah. So just by being respectful of our own indigenous, homegrown struggle or contextualized struggles, like, for instance, as Lena was saying, the particular Palestinian context of politicizing, depoliticizing, of ignoring the occupation, and, you know, just being respectful of our own struggles in context, that can itself be supportive. The issue about the marriage age, again, that's not an issue in Egypt, because the marriage age has been 17 or 18 for a very long time, and it's not debatable. There was a period during the Muslim, maybe you are referring to that, I don't know about Pakistan, but in Egypt, there was a period in 2012 during the Muslim Brotherhood rule when it was feared that they are going to, they didn't do it, but, you know, people just anticipated that maybe they are going to do this. To do what? That maybe they are going to try to delete these laws and make it and make no specific age for marriage. Maybe, I mean, they never did it. They never spoke about it. Maybe the Salafis did. The Salafis is more, the other extremist, literalist, Wahhabi-oriented trend, and they're very much into a minority. And that's all they like to talk about they're horrible. But no, that's not an issue. Alliances, as I was saying, particularly the PSL, particularly personal status laws, that is really the area that all feminists, of Muslim or secular background or whatever can agree on. And there has been an instant in Egypt in 2000 when the new marriage contract was worked upon, when the new divorce law, the no-fault divorce law, the women's initiated divorce law was coming out. This was in 2000. Okay, this was a time when the so-called secular or the not Islamic feminists were using religious arguments and were soliciting the help of women working in theology to use religious arguments, to use Islamic history and the history of archives to do this. So there is room, as Safa was saying, for cooperation on specific issues. The transgender and the homosexual. Transgender cases in Egypt, as far as I know, are looked upon from the medical perspective. It's a medical issue, and they have to get, be tested by medical committees and then get an approval of a medical committee for correction of, that's. I don't have enough information about that, so I cannot speak to it, but there are groups in Egypt that are trying to come out and work for LGBT rights in the public, but it's very difficult at this point, not just from the religious conservatives, but from the state itself. It's still a very much, it's a taboo. Yeah,
let's make it in the second round.
Okay.
Women's voices?
The azan, yes, the azan. Not just the azan that have always been performed. Many things have been performed by men, and it's a big problem. But it's definitely the reason for it. Definitely is not because of the women's voices are haram. I'm sure you know that. Definitely, no, of course not, of course not. This is a historical practice. I've never really thought about, just like male imams too. But it can be open for discussion. And why not? I mean, we can open it for discussion and for examination of that as a practice, maybe in a history. Anything can be open to discussion, but definitely we do not confuse this with something as definitively wrong as saying that women's voices are haram. Haram meaning forbidden or religiously unlawful. Yeah.
Thank you, Omaima. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, I'll briefly respond. First, of course, asking about Hamas feminism, of course, when we're talking about women's movements, it's not the same as talking about feminism. There are some intersections between, feminist thought and the women's movements, but in terms of women's movements, Hamas does have there are many organizations that are women's movements organizations that are part of Hamas, and they are mainly working in the domain of charitable work, trying to help women with their basic needs. And this is giving Hamas women a constituency specifically under the dispossession of people and their deprivation. So providing the basic needs of women is also getting Hamas more constituency among people. I'll try to tackle the two questions about the LGBT in Palestinian LGBT organizations and if there is cooperation with Israeli Jewish feminist organizations. So there is very good activism and LGBT organizations in Palestine. One of the most organization that has very good work is called Al-Qaws for multiple sexualities, and one of the issues that this organization is working on is to be involved with the BDS against Israel. So it's not working with Israeli organizations. And specifically, Al-Qaws some of its work is about combating what we call Israeli pinkwashing, which Israel is always announcing that it's the only democracy in the Middle East and that it's open for multiple sexualities and all of this. And specifically Al-Qaws, and they are also saying that homosexuals in the Palestinian society are oppressed and all of this. So Al-Qaws specifically, one of their work is against this pinkwashing, and they are and I think they are an example, a very good example of how they struggle on all levels, because they are struggling within the Palestinian society for more spaces for multiple sexualities, and at the same time they are struggling against the pinkwashing and trying to also show that Israel actually is a colonial state, and while it's saying that it's a democracy for the homosexuals, they are at the same time oppressing and dispossessing Palestinians, including Palestinians homosexuals. So that's like a kind of answer for the two questions. At the end, I'm very sensitive to the whole approach of Western women can come and save Muslim woman or Arab woman. I more think of more like how we can think about solidarity, how we can think of, and that's why I think that and by the way, like the quotes that I brought at the beginning of the whole feminist project and how it had become regressive, it was from the Western American and European contexts and not in the high. So I think that building more radical organizations in the West, in the Western countries, in Europe, having linking the whole anti-colonial, capitalist, anti-patriarchal struggles together and having a more radical movement in Europe would be the best way to be in solidarity with people in the other parts of the world.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we have just a few minutes left for a few questions you might have, despite the wonderful last words of Lena. Yes, the gentleman over there.
Thank you. My name is Werner Thaler. I'm retired. I have a very simple question to you. Do you think if there is a chance in this century that any of the Arab countries will have a female president or prime minister?
Yes, thank you. I think we have a question. Yeah.
My name is Shireen, and I just finished my baccalaureate. And I'd like to ask Madame O.Abou-Bakr, since you mentioned this campaign with the Al-Azhar institution, which is the biggest Muslim establishment. And I'd like to know if you think that because of this sort of campaign, it will also change other Arabic countries which are more conservative in the way that they don't allow women to enter the streets without wearing the hijab. Yeah.
Thank you. A last one. Okay.
Hello. My name is Mehdi, so I'm from Tunisia, like Safa. By the way, thank you very much for all those explanations. And I was thinking like, I'm coming because Safa is here, she's from Tunisia, so I'm more concerned about Tunisia. I saw her on Facebook and it's like, that's why I'm here actually. But yes, I'm, of course, like it's a kind of proud. So, but then when I listened to this exceptional lady from Egypt and the problems of Palestine, of course, that's huge. That's especially in Palestine. That's terrible. So I feel very sorry for that. The question is, in Tunisia, actually, which I really don't understand, as an open-mind person, living in Austria since 2007 and actually happy here, I can see on Facebook the two kind of Tunisians. We are getting more now the L'Oreal lady, let's say, and the I call them L'Oreal ladies, so the ones without...
The hair product? L'Oreal?
Yes.
Okay.
So the L'Oreal ladies are those with...
with hair?
With hair, let's say. And for me, the pretty faces ladies, which are those with hijab. It's like they are going two different ways. We don't see them working together. Someone is behind this... dividing them. Someone is giving us the impression that you have to be whether with this you are open or you are closed. Which that's why I'm very proud of you being here, explaining us in Austria all those issues. And just I would love to know, why is it becoming like that in Tunisia? We never had this kind of situation before, because actually for me, I don't care if you have a hijab or if you have hair, no hair, whatever. It's not my business. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Safa, do you like to answer now?
I would. So there's the question of whether there is a chance that an Arab country will have a female president. So I mean, I will speak for my own country. Why not? There's no opposition to the idea from any trend of feminists. So it's up to the honestly, at least in Tunisia, it will be up to the political parties whether they will be willing to take that chance, whether they will be willing to have a female candidate, knowing that people might still go with a male leader, like in all other countries. Honestly, this is not an issue for the Arab countries. But I don't see why it can't happen, to be honest. Question about why there's a division and who's behind it. So this division is not necessarily a negative. It's not necessarily a negative point. I mean, for me, I don't think you have to belong. You have to belong to a certain group. You can look at it as, like political parties. You can say that a division by having different political parties is a bad thing. So, as I explained earlier, I do believe that it's enriching and complementary to have women fighting for the rights of women, just, tackling the topic from different perspectives and from different sides. So, I don't know. I really don't see it as much as a division. I see it as a division when it comes to certain laws, and it's almost always in relation to, for example, Quranic texts like the inheritance, equality in the inheritance, where for a lot of women and a lot of men, it gets uncomfortable for them to clearly go against a Quranic text. But I still don't see it as a problematic division. I just see it as a difference in perspective, which is in all countries and in all fields, not just in feminism. And I really don't make the distinction between women who wear hijab and women who do not, or L'Oreal women, like you call them, because they're all women, and it's a very personal choice. It's a very private choice, and people shouldn't really put women in boxes just because of what they wear. So.
Omaima, do you like to answer about
Al-Azhar?
Yes, I will
respond to the question on Al-Azhar. But just let me make sure that I understood the question. You were asking about the Azhar's influence, right, in making statements or in saying something that is religious or not. Of course, the Azhar has a huge influence on not just the Arab region, but that over the Muslim world, and that's why everybody made a big fuss about that statement that I said, because it helps. Anything that's positive coming out of Al-Azhar, officially, it's definitely going to be impactful. I've visited Muslim countries in Indonesia and Malaysia, and they have their eyes on what Al-Azhar does. So it's very important that they do positive things. But I'm not sure I understood your question. You're saying that Al-Azhar do not allow women to go inside without a veil? I didn't understand that part of the question.
I was asking if you think that this statement would change the way of lawmaking in other countries who might don't even allow a woman to enter the street without wearing a hijab, such as Saudi Arabia, other countries.
Oh, I see. Maybe. Not this, but you're not referring not just this particular statement, but in general. as I was saying, it can be very impactful. I'm not sure about Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states because they have their own contexts, yeah? So I'm not sure how impactful something that Al-Azhar would say on the very, very specific cultural practices of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, about the question is whether we're going to, is there hope of having in this century a president, a woman president in the Arab countries? In this century, yes. We still have 85 years. So we have, I think, yes. And you know, I was thinking that in the 1920s, which is only 80 years ago, 90 years ago in Egypt, we were, there was a discussion whether women should enter the university or not. You know, in the 1950s, we were discussing whether women should be ministers or not, and now there are 6 Egyptian ministers in the state, or 7 or something like that. So yes, things can happen. I remember in the 1960s. In the 1960s, there was a big controversy over a woman, when I was young, over a woman, a female student in the university, in Cairo University, who went to the university in a pair of trousers. And that was in the 60s, and that was, you know, didn't wear skirts, and that was considered a scandal, you know. So maybe there's hope in this century for a woman president. Was there? Yeah, your question about the problem with your, you know, you already are assuming, it seems to me, in your own perception, that there is a huge division or a polarization that can be spotted in terms of appearance, yeah? Maybe not you personally, but cultures, even Western cultures and our own cultures, we already make the assumption that a hijabi woman is going to be very different from a non-hijabi woman or Muslim or Arab. And that's not always the case, by the way. You know, the obsession with the hijab, I think, is a male obsession. Because whether I'm not picking up, I'm not attacking you. It's just something that I want to say. So you give me. It's a male obsession, and it's in all cultures, really, in Western and non-Western culture, because it's visible, and it has to do with the problem of a woman's body and the visibility of woman's body. And so the extreme fundamentalist secular want the female body to be available, to be accessible, to be visible. Yeah? And the extremist religious who, in the name of religious extremism, want to cover a woman's up because for the protection of their own inability for self-control. So it's always always the male gaze. It's about the male gaze, whether to protect the male gaze or to allow the male gaze to enjoy itself. And you know, and I'm sure Safa and Lena will confirm that. In our parts of the world, you know, hijabi and non-hijabi women are friends all the time, and we never talk about it. It's like, you know, wearing trousers or skirts or blouses. It's just another way of wearing. But because it is so visible, so I can understand why it is. It's easy to make that polarization. But this is something that we want to overcome, and we want to prevent the state or the Western intelligence, the elite and the intelligentsia, the fundamentalist secular intelligentsia in our societies, or the conservatives. We want to stop all these different trends and parties from instrumentalizing the issue of the hijab and focus on real issues like education, like work, like exploitation, like colonialism, like privilege, and there are many, many issues that women suffer from that we need to focus on.
Thank you. Do you want to conclude? Thank you very much, Omaima. do you want to conclude with a very last and a very short statement?
No, it's not a statement. Maybe just to answer the question of if we will see, like in the Arab world, woman as prime minister, I would say that I don't want to see a woman like Thatcher, for example, because for me, women are not their sex. Women are what their positions, what their ideologies. So the question would be if we want to see, because I don't think that there is inherently good about being a woman, because also women can be very cruel, and women can be part of exploitation and colonization. So the question should be if we will change the structures and we will have like women who can also reflect what other women need, because what we need is not empowering individual women. What we need is how we can empower women collectively. And in this sense, it doesn't mean if there is a woman in decision making, this means that it's for the interest of all women. So, and I think just to finish, this is also related to one concept that was very critical for feminists, for radical feminism in the 60s and the 70s. The concept of empowerment was first a very revolutionary concept. It was used by feminists and other social movements, and it was meaning how to empower people to be able to challenge power structures. But throughout the years, this very concept also was co-opted by different like conservative institutions, including the World Bank, which is now using empowerment, but as empowering individual women, and it's just taking the revolutionary and radical power of the concept and turning it into another concept, but keeping the concept. And this is one of the problems that is happening also with the other feminist struggles. Thanks.
So, thank you really so much for all of your wonderful concluding statements, I would say. Thank you very much, Safa, Omaima, and Lena. Really, it was absolutely wonderful to reopen a kind of space in talking about the issue of solidarity, social justice, differences, not hierarchies, different perspectives from an egalitarian point of view. And thank you very much really for joining our event. I think we have already prepared some snacks and drinks and can continue hence our discussion on a very informal base. And Magda, yes, I will do it. Book presentation, the next VIDC event on the so-called New Turkey, a book presentation after the military coup, 16 comments on the New Turkey. We'll be here next Monday on the 22nd of October at 7 p.m. here in the public library. So thank you very much, and let's continue our discussion.